Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and thanks for tuning in for the build. Today, on the 250 SX project, we're going to be working on replacing the linkage bearings. In this part of the series, I'm going to be showing you how I pressed in, assembled, and greased all of my bearings, washers, and seals. So let's get to it. Okay, now step one is you want to get your bearings as cold as possible. So I recommend you put them in the freezer at least 24 hours beforehand to be ready. Okay, here's the whole bearing rebuild kit right here. So as you can see here, this is step by step on how to do it. First of all, you want to press in these bearings. And after these bearings are pressed in, then you want to put in these washers and put in these cogs. And after those are done, you're going to want to press in these seals here. And then last but not least, slip in these metal rings on the outside. And this right here, this one's only got one bearing because as you can see, it's smaller than the other ones.
I made a trip to the local TSC store to get this homemade nut washer bolt combo here to press in the bearings. But being that I didn't buy the extra nut to lock them on the threads, I had to use the vise in order to get the job done effectively.
Okay, now that our bearings are cold, we want to heat up our linkage. So go on ahead and grab a propane torch. Now that the linkage housing is hot, you're going to want to make sure the cold bearing is level before you go on ahead with pressing it into the housing. For pressing in these bearings, I found it suitable to use a 21mm socket.
Okay, now that we have the bearing pressed into the sleeve, I highly recommend using a cloth or a towel of some sort to put in the hole of the bearing to make sure you don't lose any needles or get any of that dirty or dusty inside. Last but not least, now that both of the bearings are pressed in and you have the cog and washers on both sides in there, I'm going to use a washer and get the dirt and oil seal pressed into the bearing housing, and that'll be complete.
And now, we're just repeating this step for the other side.
Before you consider anything complete, you should take a look at the bearing and the housing to make sure there's no chips, dents, or any damages that you may have actually caused during the pressing process. Okay, the oil and dirt seals went in smoothly, so now, last but not least, we're going to be putting on the metal shoulders. Sometimes you can press these in with your fingers, but other times you might have to grate a little bit of heat on them and use a rubber mallet to tap them lightly in place.
Perfect. And now that we got one of three done without any issues, we're going to copy this process and use it for the other two. Okay, and this part is good. All 3 bearing assemblies are in there, so we're going to be working on the other part of the linkage now.
When pressing in the bearings for this part of the linkage, I had made a mistake. I had pressed the bearings in most of the way and put just a little bit too much pressure on the one side and ended up damaging the bearing and spitting all the needles out. And you can hear me here. So now that I ran into that speed bump, I had to order new bearings, and then the next day I continued with the build.
Something to note when putting on the assembly for this part of the linkage. As you can see from the diagram, the seals aren't exactly identical to the ones that are in the other part of the linkage. These seals are mainly rubber with a small metal ring on the inside, not to be confused with the metal ring with the rubber on the inside. Okay, now just like we did with the other part of the linkage, we're going to be using a washer to get the bearing in most of the way, and then using a socket to bottom it out. Great, now that we've got the bearings pressed in and the washers in there, we're going to go on ahead and get the oil seals in place. But before I put those seals on, I'm going to pack this thing with grease. Okay guys, we've made it here to the finish line. We have all the linkage bearings pressed in and sealed for both parts. Last but not least, what I'm going to be doing here is taking this cog and putting it through the hole to get all the excess grease out. Then I'll be putting it together and putting it on the bike. Thank you so much for tuning into this part of the 2017 KTM 250 SX build. I hope I've been able to help you in rebuilding your linkage bearings too. Now if you want to be part of the build, I hope you like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next part. Peace. Did you subscribe yet? Did you subscribe yet? Smash that button!